Let's look at creating a few more queries based on different criteria. And just to kind of maybe review some of these different types of queries we've been covering. So in the first example, we'll just do a simple query, and we're going to base this on one table. So go to the Create tab, let's create a query in Design View, and we'll base this on the Employees table. And in this example, let's say that we want to show all of our Florida employees who were hired after the year 2000. Alright, and we could do that. In this case, we'll specify employee ID, and we'll do last name, and we'll do first name, and let's pull down the state they're in, and let's pull down the date they were hired. Alright, so we'll throw all of this in from the employees table, and let's say we're going to sort it in ascending order. Alright, so least to greatest. And as far as specifying the criteria, we'll need some compound criteria, and so I have to match both of these, in which case the state would equal Florida, and the date hired we could do greater than, less than, not equal to, but in this case we want to specify, let's say that after December 2000 and beyond, so it could be December 31st 1999. It has to be greater than that. Okay, alright, and that will be our criteria. So, and go ahead and save the changes, and we'll just call this Q1. Two criteria, just to kind of give us an example there. Alright, so in this case, as far as being hired, 2004 and 009, in this case our employee Ann Smith, and that was again to meet our criteria. If we open that in Design View, well, they've got to be in the state of Florida, and they had to have been hired after December 31st 1999, so after 2000. So let's take a look at our table data and make sure. In this case, Ann Smith, yes, she's in Florida, and she was hired after December 31st 1999. Now there is another person that was hired after that date, however they're not in Florida, they're in Arizona. That's Wile E. Coyote. So just to kind of give you an example of using compound criteria. Now, our previous query was a logical and remember, in a logical and, both sides have to be true. So for a record to match, they have to be in the state of Florida, and they have to have been hired after December 31st 1999, in which case if I run the query I only get one record. Now we're going to do an OR, and the easiest way to do that is to copy and paste, because they're almost the same but not quite. And I'll simply call this Q2, and criteria, two criteria OR is what we'll call it. I want to open it in Design View before I run it, and instead of having these in the same row, and I'm just going to cut and paste into OR. Now the difference is, remember, and both sides have to be true, or only one side has to be true. So now it'll display records if either they are in Florida or they were hired after December 31st 1999. Either way, it looks subtle, the difference, just putting a little criteria in one row or another, but the effect on the database can be profound. Again, watch what happens if I run and I only get one record, because it has to match both Florida and being hired after December 31st 1999. But if I run OR, in this case I get 5 records, because it's either they were in the state of Florida, or even if they're not in the state of Florida, if they were hired after December 31st 1999, it would display those records. Let's practice a little more, and this time we'll kind of review doing a totals query. So I'm going to open a new query in Design View, and this time I'm going to join two tables together and just drag it over to complete the join operation. And what I want to do is I'm going to specify a field, total time or hours worked for employees. I'm going to just specify hours, and I'll do total hourly time. How about that? And I'm going to go ahead and add in the employee table, and whether or not we'll break it into two categories: U.S. citizen or non-U.S. citizen. And then what I want to do is, remember I need to go up here and click on the totals button. So I'll do that. It'll add the row and totals. And then by default it's group by and group by, but I want to add up the hours. So I'm going to choose sum this time. And then that's okay. I'll display both categories, U.S. and non-U.S. citizens. So I'm going to save it. And I'm going to call this Q3 totals hourly time. Let's call it hourly time. Alright, and then if I run the query, notice that I get, in this case, for both U.S. citizens and non-U.S. citizens, the total amount of hourly time that was worked. For our next one, let's do a calculated field as well as joining or creating a relationship between three different tables. So again, I'll click on the Create tab, go to Query Design View, and I'm going to pull in employees, biweekly hourly earnings, and payroll type. I'll add those. I'm going to drag between the fields to create my relationships. Alright, build the relationships and set up with the join operation. And I'm going to specify, let's see, we'll do the primary key of employee ID. And why don't we do last name and first name. And in addition to that, let's specify whether or not they're salaried. And in addition to that, let's specify the weeks, the week that they have, specific week that they have worked. Actually, let's do salary, and let's do their hourly. We'll specify their hourly pay as well. And let's specify the week that they've worked. And then the last one we'll do is a calculated field. Let me kind of shore these up a little bit. Pull these columns: last name, first name, salary, hourly pay week. Alright, and the last one will be a calculated field, and we'll call it total pay. And total pay will be the hourly pay, of course, multiplied by the hours worked, right? Remember, we have to pull the field data, has to match up here. So hourly pay and hours from these two tables have to match up exactly. If I didn't, right, if I misspelled something or put, it would think that was a query operation. I get a pop-up window and it asks me for the data. So you want to make sure you carefully match the field data in your tables. So there's a calculated field. Now we just need to throw some criteria in here. So for this particular one, let's specify week 2. We only want week 2. And we'll do an and. Remember, and both sides have to be true. So in addition to week 2, we're only interested in hourly employees, not salary. So we'll specify that as no. Okay, so 2 and no. And we can go ahead and save this. And we'll call the example Q4. And this will be, what will we call this? Practice for a calculated field 3-table join total pay week 2. Boy, that's an excessively long name, but hey. Right, and then if I run the operation, this will give me, for all the non-salaried, all the hourly employees, will give me their pay for that week.
I only wish I made that much in a week. Wow. $104.25 an hour. Yeah, wouldn't that be awesome? Well, anyway, you get the idea.
In our next example, let's compute their pay with overtime. So remember, totals, we're doing, this is their total pay for week 2, right? Their hourly pay and their total pay. Now let's do one thing here. We're going to modify this, and we're going to show as well as their total pay there. This is without calculating for overtime. Throw that into this next field over here. Hourly pay, and we're going to make this the hours that they worked. We'll just throw that into the query there just so you can see, right? So Q4, here's the hour. Now this isn't taking into account overtime, right? So how will we account for overtime? Right? They get time and a half for overtime. We get even more hourly pay. Woohoo! So easiest thing to do, since we're going to make a query that's very similar to the last query, would be to right-click, copy and paste. And this time I'm going to call this one Q5. And calculated field 3, table join, total pay, week 2, total pay, week 2, why don't we call it overtime pay? Overtime pay and total pay, whatever. Alright, so that's what we'll call it. So we could do something very similar to what we did before, but the problem is in the calculated field, we're not taking into account that after 40 hours, they get time and a half, and their pay is going to change. So we need to formulate or come up with an expression that will do that calculation. And then we're also going to have to pass in some criteria, because if they haven't worked over 40 hours, we don't want to do that calculation, right? We don't want to pay them time and a half if they haven't gone over 40 hours yet. And there's going to be some precedence issues here. This is simple right now, we're just doing multiplication, but we're going to have to use parentheses because there'll be some precedence issues eventually. So what we want to do first is, we want to go ahead and calculate out their hourly pay times their hours. Alright, I'm going to put that or wrap that in parentheses. And then we need to add that to their overtime pay, right? So into their overtime pay, I'm going to add open and closing parentheses. And then in this operation, we want to do something completely different. And the only other thing is, well, this part, the normal pay is only going to be for 40 hours, right? So their hourly pay times 40, that would be their normal pay. And then their overtime pay would be what? Basically the hours that they work minus 40. In other words, think about it like this. If they work 45 hours, 45 minus 40, that's 5. So they work 5 hours overtime. Get it? So that part, this part of the calculation would give us the number of hours they worked over 40, their overtime. And we need to multiply that by their wage rate. And again, this part here, we would want to place, we want to go ahead and subtract that, and we'll multiply it, get that to happen first, in other words. We can multiply it by their hourly rate. Alright, so hourly pay. So 5 hours overtime times their hourly pay, what they normally make per hour. And then multiply that by 1.5. And we don't really have to have extra parentheses here because multiplication binds the same. But where we would get into trouble if we didn't have parentheses is right here. Subtraction doesn't bind as tight as multiplication, and we don't want this to happen first. We want this to happen first. So this needs to be in parentheses, if you understand what I'm saying. And then we might choose to wrap this whole expression, because we want to add the normal pay to the overtime pay, in an outer set of parentheses. Because after all that's said and done, that's the thing we want to add together to the other value. Up to you. That's just to hopefully clarify things. And then let's see if I'll try to get all this on one page here. Maybe drag this back some and drag this over some. Maybe you can hopefully see everything. Alright, so now you can kind of hopefully see everything. So total pay, it's going to be their hourly pay times 40, right? And then plus, well, whatever hours they work. Say they work 48 hours. That's 8 hours overtime, right? So 48 minus 40, that's 8, times the hourly pay they make per hour, plus time and a half, 1.5. And then the only other thing we have to do is throw some criteria in here. and we'll still keep it for week 2. We still want it so that only if they're salaried, only if they're not salaried, if they're hourly, would it display. But also for the hours, there's one more criteria. We only want to display this particular calculation, the overtime pay, if it's greater than 40. And so we could throw that in here too. Alright, and we'll do that if we did that. This will just show the overtime earnings. Alright, so let's go ahead and save this as it stands, yes. And we'll run it. And now notice, well, I'll need to format that for currency as well, but now notice it's adding the overtime pay in there as well. Okay, so, and let me do that. Let me open this in design view, and let me right click here, go to properties, format, we'll format it as currency. Okay, let's save the changes. So this is their normal pay without overtime. So in other words, 26.25, say John Jones, he's making $1,181.25. This is their pay with the overtime. And so he's got 5 hours of overtime in there, so John Jones is making $1,246 versus $1,181. So that's just adding his overtime pay in. You kind of get the idea. And then, you figure only the hours worked over. Let me make this based on 10, just to kind of, it'll make it easy to calculate or easy to show you. So I'm going to go here real quick, and I'm going to modify. Let's do payroll type here. And I'm going to modify this from, I'm getting a demotion, yikes, only going to be $10 an hour. But, that'll be decimal or base 10, so I'll make it easy to kind of see or follow or track the calculation. So let's look at that. So if I'm making $10 an hour and I put in 55 hours, well, I get $550. Well, the first 40 hours, that was normal. But, if I put in 55, the 15 that are over the 40, I should be getting time and a half for. Instead of 10, I should be getting $15 an hour, right? So it's easy to see here, no overtime. Now here, this will calculate the overtime. So yeah, I get my normal, times 40 there, so that would be my $400. But then for the next 15 hours, instead of making 10, I'm making 15. So that's where that calculates my overtime, and that would show you the overtime there. And one more time, just to show you the calculated field value. Try to pull these back here. Here was my calculated field value here. Alright, so total pay, hourly paid times 40, right? That was the normal. And then subtract the 40 and then hourly pay there. Alright? Okay. The only other thing to think about, if I don't specify this, I'm okay. Let's take a look at this real quick. Alright, we'll put greater than 40 as the criteria real quick. Save it and run it. So we've got 4 records here. Alright, no change. Open that into design view. Let me pull out that information, save the changes. And no, at this point, no change. Pretty much the same data going on there. Now what would happen if, let me go into the hours tab here. What would happen if somebody had less than 40 hours? Right, so what if I only put in 35 one week and 55 another week? Maybe I put in 38. Right, what would happen there? So in this case, I'm going to go, we're only doing it for week 2 anyway, but if I run it, notice here, in this case, I put in 38 hours. What's going on? If I put in 38 hours, I should only, that's a pretty straightforward calculation. I should have made $380. Alright, so the problem is if I don't do overtime, or if I have 40, I'm going to get into trouble with doing this calculation here. You know, subtracting and figuring out the total pay there. So if I ran this, yeah, there's my 380. If I ran this, I'm actually making less money. And we don't want that, so I've got to put that criteria in there. I only want to perform this additional calculation where I'm subtracting 40 if I've actually worked over 40, right? Otherwise, there's no point in, if I haven't worked over 40 hours, there's no point in doing an overtime calculation. Not to mention, I would just get an error. So if I do that, notice now that pulls me out of that record. So overtime pay week 2, I'm not even there. So just, additional criteria we want to put in that table. Let's say that, I wanted to give out maybe some bonuses, but maybe they were different rates. Instead of doing a flat rate, like maybe a cost of living raise or something like that, maybe it was based on employee performance or something, different bonuses to different employee IDs or employees. Well, to do that, I could use an update query, and I also want to create a table. So I'm going to make a table in design view, and we'll do employee ID, and we'll make that text based, and we'll just make this their bonus, and let's make that currency. We'll do that as currency there. Alright, and let me save the changes, and we'll call this bonuses. Oops, let's not forget our primary key. Right click primary key, and let me make sure, I want to make sure I name that the same. Oh, I called that all caps. It's not case sensitive, but I don't know, I don't like the inconsistency, so let me just go here. Maybe I'm just kind of obsessive compulsive crazy. Alright, so all caps. Alright, and then in data entry view, I'm going to go ahead and populate so 01. Let's say that the bonus is an additional, you've been a good boy, so an additional $5. And 002, 125, and 007, 235, or something like that, right? So I'll just throw some raises in there. Alright, so if I open this table, these would be bonuses. And then let's say we're going to incorporate that into hourly rates. Well, again, I want to create a query in design view. All I really need to manipulate is the payroll information, the hourly pay. So I'm going to click on payroll type, where I have that information. I want to select update. That'll add the updated to field. And I'm going to specify salaried, and the criteria is going to be new, because I don't want to update anything there. And then that's going to be from wage data. I'm going to specify the hourly pay from payroll type, and I'm going to make it updated to, it's going to be their current rate Alright, so in other words, hourly pay plus, and then I need to bring in bonus. Hang on, let me right click and let me do show table. Let me bring in bonuses here. No relationship there, and then I can't remember what I call it. Alright, bonus. Alright, so bonus. Alright, so when we update it, it'll be their current hourly pay, and in addition we'll add their bonus pay. Alright, let's save it. Yes, and we'll call this Q6. Update query. bonuses, and alright, here's our update right down here. So before we run it, let's take a look at the current hourly rates here. So $10 an hour, 26, 25, 47, 5, yada yada, so 450. So just take a look at that, and then when we run the update query, yes, notice it's gonna, in this case, modify a row here, a single row, and I'll say yes. And when I do, and so that added the $5. So I was $10 an hour, now I'm 15. Whoopee, yahoo! And let's see now. And then remember the other two that we added. You're saying, well, why is there only one record there? Well, look at our bonuses. 001, we added 002 and 007, but take a look at their payroll type. 002 is salaried and 07 is salaried, so it wouldn't apply to them. If we were going to make it apply, we'd have to pick a couple of these just for the, I guess, making the example or the case in point. Let's throw in 004 and 005, right? So notice their current pay, 26, 25, 47, 05 bonuses, which means I get another $5 bonus. Woohoo! So 004 and 005. Alright. If only getting raises were that easy. But let's update it again. Again, notice payroll type. Notice 15, 26, 47. Now, none of these employee IDs are salaried, so they meet the criteria. Remember we told it down here in the criteria, you know, salary must be no. So let's go ahead and run it. Yes. Now notice it affects 3 records instead of 1. I'll say yes. And if I were to go check the hourly rates, they've been augmented by 5 an hour, or you know, by whatever we put into our bonuses table here. So 125 and 235 respectively have been added to 004 and 005. Let's practice a parameter query. So I'm going to go to the Create tab, Query Design, and this time we're going to perform a join operation with 3 tables. So let's do employees, let's do biweekly hourly earnings, and we'll do payroll type. We'll add these 3. Let's create our, use our join operation, set up some relations here. So, and now I want to go through and I'm going to specify a few things. ID first and last, or last and first, I guess. Alright, so you get the employee, some basic data there from employees. And now I want to look at the bi-weekly payroll information there as far as hours and the week number. And so I'm going to specify here and here. And let's see, for the week and the hours that they put in, the hours they worked. Alright. And what else? Well, we don't really want, if they're salaried, we don't care, so we'll pull that down from payroll type. And for the criteria, we'll say no, if they're not salaried. Okay. And for the parameter query, in this case, let's say I wanted to let them specify the week. Input week. Say input week number right there. Just have a little pop up, and they can type in the week and get the payroll information or the payroll data. And let's do a, let's see, we'll sort in ascending order there. And then we'll, after that, we'll also sort in descending right there. The way it works is the left takes precedence over what's on the right. So if you do a sort on more than one column, it would be sorted by ID first, and then we wouldn't. But if we had multiple IDs, so, you know, last name. So I'm gonna go ahead and save it. Yes. and let's call this Q7, and parameter query weekly hours or something like that. How about that? Alright, so we'll call that, and let's run the query, and notice it pops up, it says input the week number. So let's say that I want the first week. It gives me week 1, the hours worked that week for my employees. Run it again, let's say I pop in week 2, and it gives me week 2.